It was supposed to be an ordinary morning on Live with Kelly and Mark, light banter, celebrity interviews, maybe a cooking segment. The stage lights were bright, the audience cheered with the usual morning energy, and Kelly Ripa walked out with her signature smile and effortless charm. Mark Consuelos, her husband of nearly 3 decades and co-host, followed with a hand resting briefly at the small of her back, a gesture so familiar, it went almost unnoticed. But nothing about that episode would be ordinary. They began with the usual chatter. Kelly recounted a minor disaster involving the dog chewing up a favorite pair of heels. Mark laughed and teased her about leaving them near the stairs. The chemistry, warm, electric, easy, was just like always. Then came the turn. Mark's tone shifted subtly. He glanced at the floor for a moment before lifting his eyes to the audience, then to Kelly. She immediately noticed the change. "What's wrong?" she asked, blinking. He didn't answer right away. The camera zoomed in slightly, picking up the tight line of his jaw. "There's something I want to share," Mark said, his voice low, controlled. "It's personal, and I didn't want to talk about it off camera because I knew I couldn't get through it twice." The studio fell quiet. Even the crew behind the scenes stilled. Kelly tilted her head, her eyes searching his face. "Mark, what is it?" He exhaled, that slow, shaky kind of breath that comes just before something breaks. "My dad," he began, "has been battling an illness. We didn't say much publicly because he wanted to keep it quiet. He's always been a private man. Strong, independent." Kelly's hand reached for his, instinctively. "And this past weekend," Mark continued, swallowing hard, "he passed away." The words hung in the air like fog. The silence was thick, immovable. Kelly blinked rapidly. Her lips parted, then closed again. Her face, normally composed with the polish of decades in television, crumpled like paper in slow motion. "Oh. My God," she whispered. There were no theatrics. No gasps or exaggerated sobs. Instead, it was the kind of grief that arrives like a wave mid-sentence, crashing into the middle of normalcy. Kelly reached up to cover her mouth, her eyes wide and wet. "I didn't know," she murmured, looking at him with a mix of heartbreak and confusion. "You didn't tell me before the show." "I couldn't," Mark said, voice thick. "I was afraid if I said it out loud too soon, I'd fall apart. But you deserved to hear it. And they did too," he said, nodding toward the audience. Kelly turned slightly in her chair, tears now falling freely. "Your father, your dad was God, he was such a light. He always treated me like his own daughter." Mark nodded, his hand still wrapped around hers. "He loved you." There was no script for this moment, no producer's note or teleprompter to guide them. Just two people, deeply entwined by love and loss, sitting in front of millions, raw, human, exposed. The audience was silent, save for the occasional sniffle. Viewers at home could feel it, the authenticity of grief on live television, the rare breaking of the fourth wall where performance gave way to truth. Kelly wiped her cheek with the back of her hand and tried to compose herself. "Can we talk about him? Just for a minute. He deserves that." Mark smiled faintly. "Yeah, absolutely." And so they did. They spoke about Mark's father, Saul Consuelos, a retired officer who immigrated from Mexico in the late 1960s. A man of deep integrity and quiet warmth. Kelly recalled Sunday dinners at his home in Florida, the way he'd always insist on pouring the wine and saying grace even if no one else was particularly religious. Mark told a story about how his father once drove through the night to surprise him after the birth of the youngest child, Joaquin. He didn't tell us he was coming. Just showed up with a duffel bag and a grin. They laughed, gently, the kind of laughter that aches in your ribs. "He was so proud of you," Kelly whispered. "Of everything you've built, of who you are as a father, a husband." Mark's eyes shimmered. "I hope he knew that I was proud of him too." The moment shifted again, not away from grief, but into something softer. A shared reverence. The vulnerability had melted the usual format of the show. There were no cutaways, no sudden transitions to cooking segments or commercial breaks. The producers had, wisely, let the moment breathe. The audience began clapping, slowly at first, then louder, rising to their feet. It wasn't applause for entertainment. It was something else. A communal gesture of support. Of saying we see you. That kind of applause that transcends fandom. Kelly stood and hugged Mark, tightly. Thank you for sharing him with us, she said. Even now. When the show finally did go to break, it did so without its usual fanfare. No theme music, no logo splash. Just a fade to black. But the clip would go viral before the hour was out. Not because of scandal or spectacle, but because it was real. Because it was human. Because in a world of curated moments and polished facades, here were two people, grieving, honestly and together, on national television. The headlines would read, Raw emotion, Kelly Ripa breaks down as Mark Consuelos reveals father's passing. A moment of grace on morning TV, Kelly and Mark on a family loss live on air. But the moment didn't need a headline. It didn't need a soundbite. For viewers who witnessed it, it would remain etched not as television, but as truth. The next day, they returned to the show. Kelly wore a small gold pendant around her neck, one that had belonged to Mark's father. Mark opened the show by thanking the audience for their support. And then, gently, they resumed, with lighter stories, laughter, and the rhythm of life moving forward. Because that's what grief does. It breaks, it reveals, and then, somehow, it allows life to go on, altered, quieter perhaps, but not without hope. And somewhere, off camera, they knew Saul Consuelos was watching. Would you like a version of this formatted for a blog, magazine, or news site?